Hi, I'm Brian Hickson, the Neuroscience Director for the Brain Performance Center, and I want to give you a quick summary about brain waves and how they work before we meet to go over your brain map. And we don't want to take up a whole lot of time during that time we have to really go over your specific symptoms and how they're relating to your brain waves. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time in this video kind of explaining the foundation of this, kind of what brain waves are, how they work. Just real quickly, it's very, very important you listen to this video and understand what these are. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to understand your brain map. So before you come to or go over it by video, we want to make sure you get this video and you watch this. And anybody that's going to be going over that brain map should be watching this too. So two things you need to know before we get started. And the first thing is going to be that what we're measuring is the resting state of your brain. Okay, so this is your brain at rest. We want that to come all the way down to a nice normal resting state. The electrical activity should come down to a resting state. Why this is important is, let's just use an example like heart rate. Okay, your heart rate should come down to a nice resting state when you're at rest, because there is a threshold up here that when the heart rate starts getting too much, too high, maybe around 200 beats per minute, you're going to have symptoms. Symptoms occur when the heart is maxing out, all the way up here around 200 plus beats per minute. Okay, those always occur. So if your resting state is down here, then you have a lot of reserve to run, to stress yourself, to bring your heart rate up, and to live life without those symptoms. If your resting state is starting out here, you barely do anything and you hit those symptoms. Okay? So it's the same thing with the brain. Symptoms like anxiety, panic attacks, even migraines are all symptoms of too much electricity across the brain. It's overloading the brain with electricity. You cannot have that much. When you hit this certain amount, you're going to have anxiety or a panic attack or a migraine. Let's take it, for example, a migraine. Migraines occur when the temporal lobes, typically the temporal lobes, can be other areas, but mainly the temporal lobes, hit too much electricity, these very fast frequency waves. And when it does, it releases adrenaline. That adrenaline causes a constriction and dilation of the blood vessels, and that's why you start getting this tension type headache that can go all the way into a migraine. Now, a lot of people come to us and ask, saying, how can I get rid of my migraines? And I always tell them, you don't want to get rid of your migraines. You want to have a migraine when you hit this amount of electricity. However, we don't want to wake up in the morning and already be here. We want to be down here to a nice resting state so you can have stress, you can eat something, you can have hormonal changes, you can have all these things that occur down here that naturally stress us a little bit. But if your resting state of those temporal lobes is way up here, you start hitting those things very early, and you're going to start having symptoms. And I always tell people, if you didn't get a migraine here when that hits too much electricity and that wasn't there and it kept going up, you'd probably get a seizure. Okay? So a migraine is actually protecting you from a seizure. It's shutting you down to try and get that electricity down. But what we want to do is we don't want to live this close to hitting that, triggering that migraine. So many people are all about the trigger. Well, if I don't eat gluten, if I don't have stress, if I don't, it's maybe only around my hormonal cycle that does this. Maybe when I, do this certain thing or interact with these people or bright lights or whatever it is, those are all triggers. Okay? Those are all things that move you from here to here. What we want is for your resting state to be down here, so you have a lot of reserve for all those things, and it's not triggering a migraine, it's not triggering maybe a panic attack, it's not triggering anxiety. Even attention has a lot to do with this resting state, which you'll see in a minute, and even sleep does too. So again, resting state is super important. It shows us how much reserve you have before you're going to have symptoms. Okay? If you're up here, you have very little reserve. If you're down here, you have a lot. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is brainwaves. What are brainwaves? Okay, brainwaves are basically how fast neurons are firing off electricity. If a neuron fires off 2 times per second, it creates a slow 2 hertz brainwave. If a neuron fires off fast 30 times per second, it creates a very fast 30 hertz brainwave. Okay, so brainwaves are kind of like RPMs on your car, going from idle all the way up to maybe around 6,000 or 7,000 RPMs, where it's just stressing the engine. With the brainwaves, same thing. When you're producing more like 2, 3, and 4 hertz, these very slow waves, those are actually when you are in deep sleep. This is rest and recovery. So you can see here, these delta waves less than 4 hertz, these go way up at night when you're in deep sleep. So you're going to produce the most of these at night when you're in deep sleep, and you produce the least of these when you're awake. We want it to be all the way down here when you're awake. A lot of people ask, how are we measuring your sleep when for 12 minutes you sat there awake? We are measuring these delta waves down here. We want these sleep waves to come down to a nice resting state. They should just be in this nice idle. You still produce some. It's still regulating your digestion, your immune system, hormonal regulation, all that. But it should be at this nice low resting state. Again, at night it goes way up in the deepest stage of sleep, and then when you're awake, it goes down. Now, why that's important is because when you're awake, it's the lowest it'll go. And then when you start to fall asleep, you produce more of these waves and you go into light sleep. And then you produce even more of these waves and you go into REM sleep or dream sleep. And then you produce even more of these delta waves, the maximum amount, and you go into non-REM deep sleep. And that is the stage of sleep where the brain's cleansing out all the metabolic waste, the plaques, the toxins, everything that the brain produced that day is being flushed out that night. The cerebral spinal fluid pours through the brain. It actually gives like a car wash almost. It floods through the brain. It attaches to all that plaque, gets rid of it, recirculates back up the cerebral spinal fluid, which sits between your brain and your skull. Okay, so it kind of flushes it out every 90 minutes when you hit that top sleep cycle. And then you produce less of these delta waves and it goes back into that dream or REM sleep cycle. And then you produce less and it goes back to that light sleep cycle. That takes about 90 minutes, and then you start the next sleep cycle and the next sleep cycle. So what we want is for when you're awake to be down here, meaning that nothing's stuck, that those waves are able to go up and come all the way back down, and you're able to get a full 90-minute sleep cycle. If, when you're awake, you're producing way too much delta waves, it's way too high, the amplitude's way too high when you're awake, that's the lowest it'll go. That means at night, when you go to sleep, it will go up and only down to here. Again, it's the lowest it'll go. So it goes up and only down to here, up and only down to here. So you get these short, shallow sleep cycles, maybe 40 or 50-minute sleep cycles instead of a full 90-minute sleep cycle. So it limits that from going up and down because, again, that's the lowest it'll go. It'd be kind of like if I, had a physical therapist or a physical therapist said to relax my arm, and if I could only relax it part way, then it would limit my range of motion. I should be able to relax my arm all the way so I can have a full range of motion. We want the full range of sleep cycles up and down. Okay? So when we're looking at these, we want these delta waves when you're awake to be all the way down here at this resting state. That's what we're looking for. And then once you wake up, delta waves come down, and then you start producing these theta waves. Theta waves you produce for about 15 minutes as you're transitioning from awake to asleep or from asleep to awake. These are in-between waves. These are conscious and subconscious waves together. These ones, it's fine to have these when you have a bunch of theta waves. You look like this. That's totally fine for 15 minutes as you're waking up or 15 minutes as you're going to sleep. What we don't want to see is someone that has these waves all day long. Okay? You don't want to look like this all day long. We all know the people that stay in this state for 2 hours, 3 hours when they wake up. That should be for about 15 minutes, and then these waves should go down. If these waves are staying up high across different areas of the brain when you're awake, it will slow down those areas. If you have too many theta waves in the frontal lobe of your brain, that is very typical of what we see in attention deficit because it's slowing down the attention. It'd be like trying to pay attention in this state right here. You can't do that. It's very hard. And that's why people will have more movement. They're trying to stimulate themselves. They're trying to keep themselves going. And we use movement and stress and anxiety and urgency and all those things to keep us going. Okay? So too many theta waves across the frontal portion of the brain will slow down that portion of the brain. That's typically why a lot of people use stimulant medications. It's actually stimulating those waves up. It's waking up that part of the brain and stimulating. The problem that can occur with medication is that typically people with attention deficit have a small area, maybe 5% of their brain right over the front of the portion of the brain that has too many theta waves, and all the rest of the brain has come down to a normal level of theta. So it's fine, and then you got 5% of the brain that has too much. Now, I can't give medication to one area of the brain, so I have to flood the entire brain with medication. So that's why you can have side effects from medication, because it's helping the one area, but it's hurting the other areas, overstimulating them. So if the activity is very focal, there will be more side effects from things like medication. It doesn't work quite as well. When the activity is very diffuse across the whole brain, medication tends to work pretty well. And I would argue that it should only be for a short period of time, kind of a bridge strategy as we're fixing the underlying problems in the brain. We don't want to just cover it up with medication. But again, if it's diffuse, it can work a little bit. If it's very focal, we'll have a lot more side effects. Okay? So theta waves, again, if it's in the frontal portion of the brain, it slows down your attention. If it's in the temporal lobes of the brain, it slows down memory. It can slow down auditory processing. If it's in the back of the brain, it slows down visual processing. That's someone that's maybe reading a book and going through and then be like, I have no idea what I just read. It's slowing down the visual processing. So theta waves, after 15 minutes, we want those to come down to this nice resting state, get out of our way, so that we can start being fully awake and fully conscious. And that's where alpha comes in. Alpha is the first fully conscious, fully awake wave that we need. But now these waves are not necessarily fast enough to problem solve or really think about the future, think about the past. These are very calm, present waves. These are 9 to 12 hertz. So again, they're going fast enough to be fully awake, but not fast enough to really problem solve. So 9 to 12 hertz is a very present, calm state. Okay, it's being in the moment. Okay, these are, think of this as very much as kind of like the brakes on your brain. This is when we have a lot of stress. When we take a deep, controlled breath, we activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which releases all these alpha waves, and it neutralizes our brain and brings down our stress. It stops us from thinking for even 10, 20, 30 seconds, which drops down our stress, and then we can take on more stress. And then another deep breath brings it down, and we can take on more. Think of these alpha waves as kind of like how we use our brakes as we go down the freeway. We just tap the brake once in a while to help control and manage our speed so we don't run into that car in front of us, right? And so it's the same thing with our day. When we're going about our day, we can just tap the brake, which is kind of like just taking a deep breath, and it releases these alpha waves, brings our stress down, and then we can take on more. We can manage stress very well. Even a tremendous amount of stress we can manage if we learn to do some deep breathing techniques, some meditation techniques, and we practice. But also you have to produce enough of these waves. Some people don't produce enough of these waves, so they're very low on alpha. And when they are, it's like having a car with no brakes. You can hit it all you want, but nothing happens. And in that case, we have to really do some specific type of biofeedback that will bring up those waves and start growing more connections between those alpha neurons so they can fire together in large groups. And so alpha is very important because, and I spent a little bit of time on this wave because our culture tends to want to throw this wave out. We typically want to be asleep and then drink 5 cups of coffee and go straight to productivity, and then drink 2 glasses of wine at the end of the day and go back to sleep, or use medication to go back awake and then go to sleep at night. And the problem is that these alpha waves, when we still our brain and we're present, this is where we can listen to someone more instead of just preaching at them. This is where we can have more empathy for someone instead of just problem solving. This is where we connect with people. This is so important for relationships, for understanding each other. It's also very important for happiness. When we're in the moment, when we're present, we can experience so much more happiness than when we're just going all the time. We need to be productive and achieve things, absolutely. But then when we achieve something, we need to take a break and enjoy it. We need to be able to be present and really absorb this. We need to absorb our kids when they're growing up and look at these moments. They go so quick through life. And when we're in this alpha kind of present state, we can enjoy things. We can soak things in. We can bring in memories and store them in us that help us have so much more happiness through life too. So being present, again, is a long lost art, and the generations coming up right now, this is, it's not called being present, it's called boring, right? And, the problem is that kids are bombarded so much with video games and YouTube and social media and everything going on that if we have 5 minutes of downtime, it feels so boring, we can't handle it. And the problem is that we need to be able to be comfortable. We need to be able to put the brakes on and just be present, just observe and just relax, even for a short period of time, and not have just this bombarding of technology being hit us, in the brain, and need so much stimulus. So alpha is very important for putting the brakes on, for being present in relationships, for having happiness, making memories, but just even for managing stress as we go about our day. Okay, so alpha is really important here. Now, with alpha, we don't want to have too much alpha. This seems like such a great, Zen type wave, but if you have too much alpha, if you're stuck in this state all the time, it's like having your brakes stuck on your car all the time. Okay, it doesn't go very well if it's stuck on. If the brakes are on, that's great for stopping. That's not great for going. So we want these to actually shift, almost like gears in the car or like brakes in your gas. And if you're stuck at producing too much alpha in a certain area of the brain, it's neutralizing that area of the brain. In this state, we cannot problem solve. We can't have processing speed fast enough to know what to do and to feel in control. In this state, if we have too much alpha, it neutralizes our brain, and when a problem comes at us, it's just too much. I don't even know where to start. It's overwhelming, and I just want to just go to bed, right? When in this state, if my wife came home and said, "Hey, we're going to dinner with these people tonight," if I was in this state, I'd be like, I'm gonna have to get ready. I'm gonna have to figure out what to wear. I'm gonna have to talk to those people all tonight. It's just so difficult. I don't even want to do it. Just tell them I'm sick, right? So you can see how this can cause neutralization of the brain, which can cause depression. It can cause lower motivation. It causes overwhelm, anxiety. Things that were once simple to do, like going out to eat with people, now become overly difficult. And it's very much like trying to drive a car with the gas on, but also the brake on. If the brake is stuck on, when you hit that gas, you're having to push so much gas to make it go. You're fighting that car the whole time. It's not very enjoyable. Okay, and so when there's too much alpha in a certain area of the brain, it can neutralize that area of the brain and stop it from really working well. Okay, so when we are done relaxing, this alpha needs to come down, and then we need to produce these beta waves. These beta waves are like the gas pedal to our brain. Okay, this is what helps it function. Every area of the brain does a different function, and when an area is producing beta waves, it's functioning, it's going, it's working. When it's producing alpha waves, it's resting. Okay, so it goes and it needs to rest. Think of it very much like flexing a muscle and then relaxing a muscle. You don't want to keep a muscle flexed all the time. You don't want to keep these beta waves going all the time. First of all, because it fatigues you. Every time a neuron fires off, it requires fuel, and that fuel is from blood. So if a neuron's firing off 25 times per second constantly all day, you wonder why you feel fatigued. Your heart's actually having to pump faster to try and get enough blood flow to the brain. Your brain at rest takes 20% of your blood flow goes to your brain. There's no organ that comes close to that in your body. Okay? And when you are under stress, it can take 50% more blood flow. So instead of taking 20%, it can go all the way up to 30%. So that's an additional 10% blood flow that has to go to the brain. Now, the heart cannot pump that much blood. So what it does is it starts shutting down the digestive system to be able to supply blood flow to the brain for the emergency that you're in. Okay, that's why stress causes so many digestive issues, because blood flow leaves, it lessens in the digestive system, which causes constipation, low motility, bloating, gas, all kinds of digestive issues. Not to mention that the intestine and the gut is where the majority of your neurotransmitter, the molecules that make your neurotransmitters, are actually developed and created, and so those have to get up into your brain. So when you shut down the digestive system, you're kind of shutting down the factory that makes the neurotransmitters for the brain. So stress can cause all kinds of issues, from fatigue to digestive issues to chronic disease throughout the body, because the heart rate goes up, it's stressing, it goes to the stomach, and the digestive system shuts down, and all the things we need to live life healthy start shutting down for that stress. Now, in an acute situation, that works fine. If I have stress for an hour and my digestive system shuts down, no problem, then it comes right back online. It's when that turns to chronic, when this starts staying up all the time. That'd be like keeping a muscle flexed all the time. Okay, so we want this stress to come up and then come back down. In different areas of the brain needs to be going up and down throughout the day so we don't fatigue ourselves. Okay, so that's going to be very important. And then we don't want these to stay up also, because that's where the brain can just be going so fast that we can't fall asleep at night. We can't fall asleep at all. We are sitting there trying to go to sleep, and our brain's just going. We have no control of our brain. It's just going, just constantly. Okay? So we want this to go up and down. So it needs to come down, and then you produce these high beta waves. Now, high beta waves are fight or flight waves. These at 26 times per second. When you start producing a tremendous amount of these, you actually start to have adrenaline released. And when that adrenaline gets released, it starts to constrict muscles. It starts to constrict blood vessels, constrict and dilate. That's where, again, you get that tension headache or migraine. It can actually clench your jaw up. It can actually tighten your neck and shoulders. It can cause headaches and all these, even pressure across the head can cause a lot of stress across the head. But also, depending on where it is, if it's in the frontal portion of the brain, it can cause intense, rage and anger. You can go, once you hit a certain amount of these waves and a certain amount of adrenaline in your brain, you go from logical thinking to just emotional mood, just a reaction to things. It's just emotional reaction where we have no logic at all. We lose it, just go. Now, everything I just said is actually wonderful for you if you're being attacked. That's what these are for. If you're being attacked, these are great waves. If you're not, we don't want to produce these waves. We want these to be all the way down here. Your fight or flight waves, your high beta waves, should always just be idling. They should just be sitting here. They don't turn off during the day. They just sit down and idle. And here's maybe where you'll get a fight or flight response. Okay, so if they're way down here, it would take basically someone attacking you to drive those all the way up to this. Okay, but what we see a lot of times is someone that has these fight or flight waves. When they wake up, they're already right here. Okay, and then little tiny stressors throughout the day are triggering this. And this is someone that looks like they're going from 0 to 100 so quick. They lose control. They have these emotional reactions. You can't think logically at that point. You can't think about consequences or rewards at that point. Once you pass that, it's just this emotional reaction, and you have to wait till that comes all the way down. Okay? And they can be very aggressive, they can hit, they can have rage, depending on where it is in the brain, depending on the age and maturity and stuff too. Once you pass that, it becomes a problem. Now, again, we think someone goes from 0 to 100, but really they're always starting at 80. They're always at 80, but again, under this, they don't have symptoms. But they're so close that when they get stress or they feel an injustice or anything happens, it triggers that pass, and then they have this huge emotional reaction. Okay? And what we want them to do is start at 0 and go to 20, and they're at 80 and going to 100. Now, 80 to 100 and 0 to 20 is the exact same reaction. It's just a different starting point. And again, this is where resting state comes into such an important thing because we need to be able to start down low. If we have a kid that just erupts whenever we do anything, or we ever criticize them or tell them no or anything like that, they're usually at this point where they're just hitting here. And the problem is that you cannot have, once you have that emotional reaction, you're not thinking about consequences. You're not thinking about the rewards. You've lost all logical thinking. So nothing really matters. All that we can do with neurofeedback is bring that down lower so that when they have a reaction, they come up to here and they can still consider consequences and rewards to their actions. They can still think. What neurofeedback does is it gives them a split second more of thinking before they react. And that's what ends up changing behavior, is that split second where they can consider things each way. But again, if it's in the back of the brain, it's just stress. It's stress across the brain. It can be those headaches, migraines. It can be, again, the jaw clenching, teeth grinding, that tightness in the neck and shoulders, all those things as well. If it's in the very back of the brain, it can be visual processing, where it's actually putting strain on your vision, and vision can actually go down very quickly. So you can see how all these things, we want the nice resting state so that your brain's able to handle it. So when you're in this nice resting state, you can bring one of these waves up and then bring it down and bring another wave up. It's kind of like getting in your car and having your gas pedal and your brake in a nice neutral position, so you can push your gas when you want to go, let off your gas when you want to stop, push your brake when you want to stop, let off your brake when you want to go. You're in control. Okay? It doesn't mean you do everything right, but it just at least means that you're in control. And that's what we want for the brain. We want to be able to bring these alpha waves up when you're wanting to just relax and chill out a little bit, lower stress, maybe go to sleep, turn off the brain. We want to bring these beta waves up when we're trying to get something accomplished and increase our focus. We might want to bring these theta waves up when we're getting tired and trying to go to sleep. And then we get these nice big delta deep sleep cycles, and we feel refreshed. We got everything cleansed out at night, and we wake up with energy and focus, and all our neurotransmitters are firing correctly. And then once in a great while, if someone's ever attacking us, we've got these high beta to help us get out of trouble. And that is the basis that we want. When we look at your brain map, we're going to look at 5 maps of your brain. We're going to look at one of just your delta waves, one of just your theta, your alpha, your beta, and high beta. And again, all these are taken during that 12 minutes when your brain map's being recorded. We're just going to filter down and only look at your delta waves first. Only look at your theta waves. Only look at your alpha and beta and high beta. And what we want is for those all to be at a nice resting state. Now, It's a huge normal. So there can be, a little bit where I drank some coffee before I came in, I was stressed before I came in, or I didn't sleep very good the night before. Those all move things about half a standard deviations. We're looking for 1.5 standard deviations high to 1.5 standard deviations low. So that's about 90% in the bell curve because we're looking kind of for the extremes on each side. So don't worry if you were a little stressed coming in. Don't worry if you didn't have very good sleep coming in. Those things are not going to matter at all. We're going to be able to see really kind of where the brain is really stuck either way. So I hope this helps, and I will see you soon when we do your brain map.